Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is October 10th and I'm just going to talk to everyone why all MGTOW guys out there should look at getting a second residency if they're unable to get a passport in a second country or third country. Okay, so I've spoken before about the importance of trying to obtain a second passport. Many of you guys may know about a famous YouTuber known as Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist. He emphasized the importance of having a second or third passport as a sort of insurance, as a sort of redundancy if something happens in your home country. And this could be a first world country, third world country, it doesn't matter. As we saw the past year, anything can happen at any moment and you can be quite surprised. Everything can be turned upside down at a moment's notice. And this is why I think it's really important to look at obtaining a second residency if you're not able to get a second passport, because often people may not qualify for a variety of reasons. It may be because lack of funds, they don't meet requirements for profession, the country's simply not permitting people from that particular country to immigrate at the time. There's many different reasons here to look at. And although second passports can be very difficult to obtain, second residencies, I believe, are actually very obtainable for most people. And the plus side with a second residency is that it can be used to then obtain a second passport. And so like if you decide to study in a country, most people in the world can go and study somewhere, like a bachelor or master degree. They can probably find a university that will accept them and they can become a student. And often they'll receive a student visa. From this point, the student visa could then be very easily transferred into a work visa, and then that work visa could become a long-term document. And they could obtain a passport via that. There's definitely a path here, and often the main key is the time required. That's the difference. I think when we look at passports, whether it's by CBI, citizenship by investment, or any kind of passport, second passport, third passport, typically these people have less time, but they have money, whereas people who don't have the money can often pursue a second residency and not have any issues. As long as they have the time and they have some funds, they can probably go to a country and become a student, live there, and eventually perhaps obtain a passport through the time that they've been there. When we think about the fact that many people study for several years, if someone's doing like a 4 or 5 year program, by being there that long, eventually they could obtain a long-term document, and that very easily could become a passport. Or perhaps they may find a woman and become married, and then they can obtain a document through their spouse. There's a lot of different scenarios here that could play out, and this is a very effective way to optimize your options. Of course, a second residency is not a second passport, and there's short-term and long-term residencies. And for example, my brother here in Estonia, he has a long-term residency. He has a 5-year doc, and this was done via business. Many people who study here, I have friends who are in university in Estonia, they also have longer-term documents, but it's via education. And then there's people who may have 1 or 2 year documents. And from country to country, it all depends on the person and their qualifications, the kind of document they can obtain. But the one common trend here, as I stated before, is often these people are not in a position where they can just outright buy a passport. But it definitely is the intention of some of these people to try pursue a passport through this residency situation. Yes, the residency permit is not a passport, as I said. If something happens, you're not going to have the passport to back you up. If you do have a longer term residency document, though, this does carry a lot of weight with it. If we looked at the COVID situation, many people who had long-term residency documents, as long as they did not leave the country, they weren't traveling, typically they could stay in that country. There was no issue. And even in some countries, people who had a long-term residency document were able to re-enter if they left. In some cases, it was just as valuable as a passport for that purpose. But as I said, it's not a passport, and this thing is going to have to be renewed. It's not like a permanent document that you'll have long term. It also means that you'll probably not be able to renounce citizenship if the day comes that you want to renounce your citizenship in your home country. You're going to have something figured out there. This document, though, can certainly be a bridge from your home country over to the country that you desire to live, and you can figure out if it works for you long term. It's also probably going to be cheaper than pursuing a passport outright, like through CBI. You're going to be able to obtain a residency document probably much cheaper, especially if we look at it as a student. So an example here would be like, say a person, they come to a European country, in Russia or Belarus, Serbia. These countries you can study very cheaply. A student goes to that country, they can become a student. They may only have to pay maybe $1,500 to $2,000 a year tuition as a student. So if we look at that, yes, you have to pay for those courses, but essentially that's giving you a student document. And in some cases, you can add addition to the document to also be able to work. You'll have some work privileges. I know in my home country, America, there's an option for student visas where someone can become a part-time employee. They can work part-time hours, and this is an option. I know also this is available in other countries such as Russia. So you could also start working part-time and be in school. So if we think about this, $1,500, $2,000, not including your living expenses, that's a fairly good price for obtaining a long-term document. When we look at the cost of just outright buying a passport, that may cost anywhere between $100,000 to a couple $1,000,000. On the high end, it's much cheaper often. And like I said, this can eventually be used to obtain a passport. You can, depending that you spent many years in that country, this will open doors so that you could obtain a passport through this means. And likewise, you won't have to pay the outright cost that a person may pay for like a CBI passport. My recommendation, if this is an option for you also, if you want to live in the country long term and you can't just outright buy a passport, is to look at other people, other students that have done this route, or other workers where they've pursued a residency document to obtain a passport, and see how the process was, see how long it took them, how difficult it was, and the whole process through obtaining this document. And if this worked for these people, then it would be a great way to go. Now, if you spoke to these people and you found out that it was either very difficult but they were able to obtain the document, or they were unsuccessful, you may want to look at that country and find somewhere else, because this may not be a viable place to go this route. Because I think there's some countries where you cannot become a naturalized citizen unless you pay a pretty significant amount of money. You can't become a passport holder through being a long-term resident. I believe there's a few countries like this. And my last recommendation here is look at the country and ask yourself, is this a country where I can see myself developing professionally and living long-term? Because this is key. If you're in a country and it doesn't really seem like it's a country that would be viable for career purposes or to being a long-term resident or citizen as a passport holder, then you may not want to pursue that country, and look at other options here. Because in this situation, you're giving a lot of time, you're inputting a lot of time into the equation rather than money, as someone who's outright buying a passport. And so you have to look at, is this time wisely invested here? And from there you can make your decision. This is just my take on this situation, and I look forward to everyone's feedback below. Thank you.